Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is African American history at the 21st century. And we have to talk about the African American history experience at the 21st century, Dr. Lewis Baldwin. Dr. Baldwin was a professor at Vanderbilt University for a long time, and so Dr. Baldwin, we're just glad to have you with us this morning.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to be back.
Well, I mean, you bring us so much information.
And you know, we've
talked
for
about
a number
so
of years.
many things, I think, for so many years. But in case there might be some individuals in this audience that might not know Dr. Lewis Baldwin. Yeah. Let's have you, Dr. Baldwin, to give us some information in reference to your background, your education, and some of your experiences during this first segment. And then when we come back after this first commercial break, we'll get into African American history at the 21st century.
That's right. Well, I'm a native of Camden, Alabama, known as the Alabama Black Belt. I grew up there in the late 40s and 50s. I attended the segregated Jim Crow schools in rural Alabama. Graduated from Camden Academy High School in 1967. And from there, I matriculated at Talladega College in Talladega, Alabama. Received a BA degree in history in 1971. From there, I matriculated at Crozer Theological Seminary in Rochester, New York, received the MA degree in 1973 and the Master of Divinity degree in 1975. From there to Northwestern University, where I received the PhD in American Christianity in 1980. And since that time, I've actually been writing a lot about Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement. That has been my primary focus in terms of my scholarship, in terms of my research. I taught at Vanderbilt University from 1984 to 2013, 29 years. Before that, I taught at Worcester College in Ohio, Colgate University in New York. So we're talking here about 35 years of teaching, 35 years of being involved in research.
Writing books.
That's right, that's right. And currently I've written, I guess, about 7 books, and I've co-edited 2, and I've edited 2, and I've co-authored several volumes. So we're talking here about 14 works on African American religious history and culture. And most of those works, of course, are on Martin Luther King Jr.
You know, Dr. Baldwin, you've got so much information dealing with Dr. Martin Luther King as well as the African American history experience itself.
Yes,
because you can't write 14 books dealing with the African American experience for the most part, even though you highlighted Dr. King without knowing something about the African American experience.
That's right.
And what we'd like to do today is to look at the establishment of the African American history experience in a formal sense, you see. And so let's start off by having you to give us some preliminary statements in reference to the African American history experience.
Yes, I think when you look at African American history, Martha, you have to first begin with a figure like Carter G. Woodson. Carter G. Woodson was born in 1875 in Virginia. He was the son of slaves. And he decided, after receiving a degree at University of Chicago, he got his MA degree from the University of Chicago and got his PhD from Harvard University, I think, in 1912. And Carter Woodson had this idea that the nation had to recognize the contributions, the achievements of African Americans to American culture, American history. So in 1915, he started the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. A year later, 1916, Carter Woodson started what? The Journal of Negro History. And in 1926, a decade later, he started Negro History Week. And Negro History Week was actually a precursor to what we call Black History Month today. Negro History Week was started in 1926. 1929, it had become a celebration in many of the states in which there was a large population of blacks. It wasn't really until 1969 that the idea of Black History Month came up. And that, of course, was with Black United Students at Kent University, your alma mater, in 1969. In 1970, the students at Kent State actually celebrated the first Black History Month, and in 1976, the bicentennial.
Very good. And let's take this first commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Because if it was at Kent State, August Meyer was involved.
That's right.
And if August Meyer was involved, then I was involved.
And probably other Roderick
That's
also,
right.
yeah.
That's right. That's exactly it. You know, he was down at Fisk. You know that, don't you?
I had heard about that.
Yeah, well, he was, well, one reason he sent me to Vanderbilt was that when he came to Fisk, you know, back in, I guess it must have been the 30s. When he came to Fisk, he was this great researcher, and he wanted to do some research, but they wouldn't let him in at Vanderbilt University. They wouldn't let him in the library over there. And so that's why he had a real hard feeling against Vanderbilt University. And that's what he said. He said, I'm going to sit you down, because I had an afro with that thing. Okay, very good. Okay.
Yeah.
And welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. Lewis Baldwin, and the issue is African-American history at the 21st century. Dr. Baldwin, let's see if we can pick up during this second segment dealing with the establishment of African-American History Week, month, and et cetera, as you were indicating before the first commercial break.
Yes, and when the commercial break came, I was really talking about the transition from Negro History Week to Black History Month. And of course that occurred in 1969 with Black United Students at Kent University. They first proposed that Negro History Week be expanded to Black History Month. That was in 1969. And in 1970, the Black United Students at Kent University actually held the first Black History Month celebration. I
was there.
Yes, and it was an important, I think, event in terms of this transition from Negro History Week to Black History Month. And in 1970, interestingly enough, Black United Students at Kent University held the very first Black History Month celebration. And it wasn't until 1976, with the celebration of the bicentennial, that the federal government officially recognized Black History Month. And at that time, of course, Gerald Ford was president. So we are talking about a process that began in 1915 with Carter G. Woodson and the establishment of the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, a process that began there in 1915 and extended up to 1976 when you get the first recognition by the federal government of a Negro History Month. And since that time, of course, we've been celebrating Black History Month. And now, in 2016, we're talking about 40 years from 1976 up to 2016.
And that's a long period in terms of studying this particular subject,
exactly,
as well as those individuals who made great contributions to African-American history during the period.
Exactly. You're really pointing to the reasons why Woodson started Negro History Week in the first place. He never lived to see Black History Month because he died in 1950. But Woodson was very interested in presenting before the nation and the world a list of the achievements, of the contributions of African Americans to national history and culture, but also to world history and culture. He felt that this was very important in the struggle against racism, because as you well know, one of the arguments of white supremacists in the 1920s and 30s was that blacks had not contributed anything to national history and culture, national artistic life, world history. So Woodson wanted to say, hey, African Americans have been great achievers. And he felt that that was important not only in the struggle against racism, but he felt that that was important in dealing with the problems of black self-esteem. That blacks had to understand that they had been important contributors, achievers in American historical life, American cultural life. And Woodson said, hey, in order to get this message across, we need a Negro History Week, and of course later, as I said, it became Black History Month.
And in a real sense, Dr. Baldwin, I think we might say that your career, in a real sense, sort of epitomizes what Carter G. Woodson was trying to achieve, which is to say that he wanted folks to be knowledgeable in reference to the African-American experience.
Yes.
And I think when you think in terms of your education, the first books you published, and et cetera, this was all added fuel to the kind of information that he felt that we ought to be preserving and we ought to be writing, and et cetera.
Exactly.
So you in a real sense, formed the sort of a core
That's right.
in terms of what Carter G. Woodson and others were concerned about. And I think you mentioned the Journal of Negro History and et cetera, that was always a medium whereby people like you and me and others could be reached, and et cetera. And so it has a long, and I think that in a real sense you played a significant role in helping to establish the scholarly aspect, because it has to be recognized that while black folks might have been involved in helping to establish this organization, not many of us produced the kind of resources that you produced, 20 odd books and et cetera, dealing with Dr. King and et cetera. That's a bulwark.
That's right, that's right. But it all started with Woodson and people like W.E.B. Du Bois, because they were publishing a lot. Not only did Woodson call for a Negro History Week, if you look at the list of publications that he provided. He wrote a book on the history of the Negro Church. He wrote The Miseducation of the Negro. He wrote a book on Negro orators and their orations. He wrote a book on African American slaves, on free African Americans during the period of slavery. So Woodson felt that African American history had to become a part of the classroom experience. It had to become a part of the educational curricula of this nation. So he pioneered in that regard, not only Woodson, but Du Bois, as I said. So I view myself and others who are writing today as standing in the tradition of these strong men.
And having read most of the information that Woodson and Du Bois, the African slave trade and et cetera, who can forget that kind of information that in a real sense inspired us all to become interested in the African experience and to know that there was a connection between Africa and the United States, even though at the time, Dr. Baldwin, a lot of folks didn't want to talk about that kind of connection. Talk about that. I mean, how did Africa fare in a real sense in reference to?
I think the importance of the work, the scholarship of people like Woodson and Du Bois is that they established the point that Africa had been a force in the shaping of world civilization. That from the very beginnings, Africa was involved, that Africa contributed to the history of the world, that Africa had been a force in the shaping of the world, of world civilization. And of course, Woodson and Du Bois pioneered in that regard. So scholars like myself and others, Sterling Stuckey, others who are writing today, are actually building on what yourself, with the kind of work you've done with African American history. We are actually building on what people like Carter Woodson and W.B. Du Bois.
So we're going to take this commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Did you know that?
I knew that. I heard the name.
Yeah, well, he was the chairman of the history department over at Tennessee State University when I went. As a matter of fact, he got me from over at Vanderbilt.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh man,
he's no longer alive.
No, I think he died. Oh, I guess about 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, he retired from Tennessee State University, went to North Carolina, and worked there for a while. But
yeah, I've heard that name.
Yeah, he was the chairman of the history department at Tennessee State University. And see what happened was that during the period of separation, Vanderbilt didn't have any Africans on the staff over there, and so he was the first person to go from Tennessee State University, where he was the chairman, to go over to Vanderbilt and teach a course over there during the summer and et cetera. And so when I came, I, in a real sense, took the chair. Thank you, and welcome back to the final segment of the show for the morning. We're talking to Dr. Lewis Baldwin, and the issue is African American history at the 21st century. Now, Dr. Baldwin, during this last segment, let's see if we can give you free rein in a real sense to sort of pull us in during this last 10 minutes in reference to some of the things that we ought to know about what we're talking about.
Yes, when we talk about the 21st century, we have to take into account the kind of controversy surrounding this celebration of Black History Month. There are many in our society, primarily in the white community, who feel that Black history is a part of American history. So why designate a month each year, February in this case, to the special celebration of a particular people? But you know, Black history has been neglected as a part of American history. Certainly it's a part of American history, but it's a neglected part of American history.
Almost an unknown part of it until Carter G. Woodson.
Largely unknown, not only, even among African Americans, and certainly among white Americans and other Americans of other ethnic backgrounds. Now, Carter Woodson himself envisioned a time, or he hoped for a time, when Black History Month celebrations wouldn't be necessary. He said that. But he said, given the view that most Americans have of African Americans, stereotypical images of Black Americans, distorted views of their roles in American history and American culture and the shaping of American civilization, given that, we need Black History Month celebrations. Or as Carter Woodson would say, Negro History Week celebrations. So Woodson himself hoped for a time when that would not be needed, but he felt that that would only come when blacks had full human rights in America, and then we could celebrate American history as opposed to focusing specifically on the history of African American people during Negro History Month. Hopefully we get to that point, but we are not yet there. Now, the other point I would like to make has to do with where we go from here in terms of our celebration of Black History Month. We know that it has been, Black history has been integrated into the classroom experiences of students and from the kindergarten level on up to college, and we know that it is a part of the educational curricula in many of our colleges and universities and divinity schools and seminaries. But where we go from here, I think, is that we need to make it a part also of our family structure. In the early days when Woodson was coming up with this idea for Negro History Week, Black history was taught in the context of family life. Around the dinner table, kids learn about Black history. We need to go back to that because I think the family needs to be regarded as an educational agency. So we need to integrate Black history into our family life and also into our religious institutions, our churches, our mosques, so that our young people will understand what happened in the time of Woodson, for an example, in the 1920s. What happened with the civil rights movement? What is happening today in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement and our efforts to advance Black rights, Black freedom to another level.
Just a wider range of knowledge and information about the African experience.
Exactly.
Because the African American experience has been different from any other experience in America.
Exactly. It is a unique experience. And I think Carter Woodson recognized that. And this is why he started Negro History Week. And this is why we celebrate Black History Month today. We're talking about a unique experience of people who have experienced oppression, in a unique way, and are people who are struggling for freedom in a unique way. And that continues, of course, in the 21st century.
And of course, if you took that particular aspect out of American history, you would really have a different American history. What would American history be without the existence of the African in America, the African experience in America? There would have been no slavery. That would be, and some of the great issues that we're talking about today, you know, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment.
Blacks have been a part of every major turning point in American history. We've contributed so much to the artistic life of the nation, to the agricultural life of the nation, to the spiritual life of the nation. And I think Carter G. Woodson was right. Celebrating Black history, affirming Black history, accepting Black history is essential not only to the spiritual, psychological, political survival of Black people, it's essential to the spiritual, the psychological, and the intellectual survival of the nation, I think.
And so at the end of this century, I think we can still hope for there being some element dealing with the African American experience, because this is an experience that is going to continue. No matter how integrated the African become within American society, there will always be that aspect of his story that has to be told.
Exactly, and we should not treat it as a footnote to American history. And that's been the problem, I think, with so much of our history of America, is that blacks are treated as a footnote, that you get distorted and stereotypical images of blacks in that history. And I think we need to get beyond that. And once we get beyond that, then we can celebrate American history.
We could have an American history department instead of an African American history department, and et cetera. But Dr. Baldwin, I believe that as a representative in a real sense of one scholarly aspect of the African American experience, because in a real sense, you really follow Carter G. Woodson and W.E.B. Du Bois and others in terms of the kind of work that you're doing and the kind of writing that you're doing. And I think that as we were inspired by the African slave trade or by Woodson's book, Education of the Negro, and et cetera, a large number of other young individuals that are coming along today, when they look at Martin Luther King, are inspired by some of the things that you've said and some of the things that you've written.
And so, also you.
And I think that we've all had some hand in helping to broaden the whole understanding of what the African-American experience has been
it's
about.
all about,
Yeah,
exactly. And I think you're quite right at that. You, myself, so many others who are making these great contributions today to the understanding of black history and black culture. We are all a part of the legacy of Carter G. Woodson.
That's right.
And W.E.B. Du Bois.
That's right.
We're standing on their shoulders. We're advancing the kind of scholarship that they were interested in pursuing and getting across not only to the nation but to the world.
What would they have done and what achievements would they have made had they had at their disposal the tools that we have to work with today?
I wouldn't venture to make an assessment of that. I think if they had exposure to the kind of resources that we have today, their contributions would have been endless.
They would have.
Would have been endless. But we have to look to them as pioneers.
Pioneers, that's right.
And look at ourselves as picking up the torch and carrying it forward.
And I'm glad to say that I know Dr. Lewis Baldwin.
You know, I'm glad to say that I know Dr.
tell people all the time,
James
that I know Dr. Baldwin. You know, he's written all those books about the African experience that has had.
I know Dr. James Haney.
I knew you before your work before I knew you. And so, Dr. Baldwin, and I say that you've done so much in terms of contributing to this particular show, and I think I've said it on many occasions. It goes back for the last 25 or 30 years. You've contributed to this show as much as you've contributed to the writing of the books, because most of the time when you write the book, we find out about it on this show, even though you're circulated worldwide in a real sense. Thank you so much. It gives us sort of a special opportunity and a special privilege.
And what you're doing is equally important.
Tie into all of these things. And so I want to thank you for coming by and sharing this information with our audience this morning, because I know that it's very, very important that we be able to do so. And I know that my granddaughter has been encouraged and influenced by, she knows Dr. Lewis Baldwin, Dr. Appleby, and all the rest of those folks. And I want to thank you. And let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you, and good morning.